During May, we're going to move to our permanent location, which is the University of Nebraska. So we're excited to do that. So this will be my last time here at Winthrop, and I'm really excited to present to you this lecture, but my slides just got cut off.
Open your computer. We're going to see if that might do it. I don't know why it's doing that.
Leave your stuff alone and let me try.
Yeah.
Redoing mine.
Yeah, I think.
That's my beautiful family. About 6 years ago.
I don't know why it's.
Huh.
It's not just PowerPoint, it's like the whole.
Yeah, it's the whole operating system.
Oh.
Yeah, let's see if that does it. Sorry, folks. Of course, technical difficulties on a presentation on technology.
There we go.
The machines are taking over.
I feel like that's setting us up for something.
It's good foreshadowing. So the title of the lecture is When the Machines Take Over, or Have They Already? Now, people have been intimidated by machines for a long time. And it might have started in the Industrial Revolution, when we started to build these huge machines that would begin to do a lot of our work for us. And you can understand why people would be intimidated. I mean, the machines that we were able to build starting in the 1800s were bigger than us, stronger than us. And I think people began being intimidated by machines because machines started to take a lot of their jobs. People started to lose out in manual labor jobs to these machines. They were superior than us in many ways, stronger, faster, more reliable, more consistent. And when computers came along, this only increased the anxiety, right? Because now these machines, computers, can be smarter than us in some sense. I mean, this computer here can have a lot more things in its memory, just data and facts, than I can. It can compute mathematically quicker than I can. And this was driven home very powerfully in 1997 when the IBM Deep Blue computer beat world chess champion Garry Kasparov. It was a huge thing in the news. You might have even read about it. And this was really intimidating to people. You know, where were we going with this stuff? And nowadays, computers, take over a lot of our jobs even more. I mean, you go to Walmart now or go to a store and most of the people that used to run the checkout stands are gone because now a computer is doing it. So this intimidation, this anxiety that machines and computers cause is real. It's intimidating. They're taking over a lot of our jobs, taking over a lot of our lives. And you know who's really, really good at tapping into our latent fears is Hollywood. Hollywood is really, really good. The artists that drive Hollywood are very creative and good about tapping into our anxieties and our fears and turning them into popular movies. So some of the greatest movie franchises, some of my favorite movie franchises are about this very idea of machines taking over. So you think about the Terminator franchise, The Matrix, which is my favorite movie franchise of all time, the Matrix franchise. This might date me a little bit. This is even before my time. But back in the 60s, it's 2001, A Space Odyssey. How many people have seen that movie? I'm curious to know. 1, 2, my boys have, of course. You really should watch. If you're a Stanley Kubrick film fan at all, or a sci-fi fan at all, this is a classic. You really should watch this movie. And we're going to see some quotes from this movie, and you'll recognize them even if you haven't seen the movie. In 2001 Space Odyssey, the machines don't take over per se. They're not trying to take over humanity per se like the Matrix or the Terminator franchise. But in 2001 Space Odyssey, HAL 9000 tries to take a superior position over the humans in the movie. So it is kind of a machine versus human dichotomy, struggle that's going on, even if it's not for all of humanity. And a similar thing takes place in the Alien franchise, which is also making a resurgence lately with Prometheus, and what was the most recent one called?
Covenant.
Yeah, Alien Covenant. So Ridley Scott is making a comeback with the Alien franchise. Now, usually when you think of the Alien franchise, you think of just the aliens. However, if you watch carefully, in every single Alien movie, there are at least one android character. And there's a lot going on philosophically in these Alien movies when it comes to these androids, who are our creation in the movie, of course. So we create these androids, and they, especially in the original one, they try to take a superior position over us. So it ends up becoming machine versus man, so to speak. And there's a lot of interesting philosophical dynamics that run through all the Alien movies when it comes with these artificial humans, these androids. Now tonight, I'm going to argue that there's a sense in which machines have already taken over the world. There's a sense in which machines have already destroyed mankind. But I'm going to argue that this has been done in a much scarier way than in the Hollywood movies. What I'm going to be talking about tonight is actually a machine philosophy that has overtaken the world. A philosophy that views human beings themselves as mere machines. And I'm going to argue tonight in this lecture that this is actually scarier than the Terminator. This is scarier than the Matrix. Because this machine philosophy doesn't destroy us physically, it does something worse. It destroys what it means to be human. It destroys our humanity. Now, a little bit of history is going to be helpful here. In the early modern era, the early scientists like Copernicus, Galileo, Newton, early philosophers, early modern philosophers like Descartes, they viewed the universe as a vast machine. You think of like Newton's laws of mechanical motion. They viewed the universe working in a very mechanical way with laws and regularities. And so there became this view in the modern era of the universe as this vast, intricate machine. However, these early scientists, early philosophers of the modern era, they viewed human beings as outside the machine. We were separate. The universe was a vast machine, the laws of nature, Newton's mechanical laws of motion, all that was very mechanical. However, we were outside the machine. We were special. We were unique. And a lot of this came from their Christian background, but they thought in terms of us having a free will, us having souls, us having love and morality. So we were outside of this vast machine that is the universe. We have machine-like parts, is what they would say, right? Our heart pumps like a mechanical pump to pump blood throughout our body, but we're more than just our physical parts. Again, some of the ideas of a soul and their Christian background were speaking into their views here. So they viewed human beings as outside the machine. We made free moral choices. We experienced love. We had rational, intelligent thought. But all of that thinking that humans were outside the machine, all that began to change during the 1800s. More and more throughout the 1800s, scientists and thinkers and philosophers began to think of humans as part of the vast machine. In fact, that we were just built from the laws of nature, that we ourselves were merely programmed machines. Now, the man most responsible for bringing human beings into the machine, so to speak, was the man Charles Darwin. And so I want to spend a large part of the lecture now on Charles Darwin's thoughts. And I want to try to answer this question. How has this man is a machine philosophy affected Western society? This idea that human beings are just machines, how has that way of thinking affected Western society? How has that destroyed our humanity? Well, the thinker Francis Schaeffer is very helpful at this point. Schaeffer was an early apologist serving in the 50s, 60s. He was a Presbyterian pastor, but he moved to Switzerland in the late 40s after World War II, and he developed a very well-known, famous apologetics ministry that's still going to this day called L'Abri in Switzerland. I've had the chance to give a few lectures there. In fact, this lecture I gave in Switzerland at L'Abri. So Francis Schaeffer was very much into studying our culture, trying to understand why Western people thought the way they did. And he gave a lecture once, that I've listened to many, many times now. He gave a lecture once on how Darwin's idea of evolution, Charles Darwin's idea of evolution, the philosophy that humans are just biological machines, how that way of thinking affected Darwin's own personal life. So you follow me? Schaeffer gave a lecture about how Darwin's machine philosophy affected his own life. And he used that to show, kind of on a smaller scale, how then the machine philosophy went on to affect all of Western society over the next 150, 200 years. So we're going to focus in on Darwin's life, his personal life first, and see how the machine philosophy affected his views, and then how that went on to, over the next 100, 150 years, affect all of Western society. Now, the way we're going to do this is by comparing the young Darwin to the older Darwin. Okay? Now, this was really fascinating to me. What we're going to see is how his views changed from a younger man, and then how his machine philosophy influenced his thought, and then how that machine philosophy changed his view of many things when he becomes an older man. Now, all of these quotes I'm going to give you come from this book. This is a very fascinating book. If you ever have to do any research for a class or you need to write a paper about these sort of things, I would encourage you to utilize this book. This is a book of personal letters by Charles Darwin. It was put together by his son. So there's a few letters that his son wrote. But what it is a collection of published personal letters from Charles Darwin. So it's, in a sense, it's kind of almost like a diary. You get to see what he was really thinking as he writes these letters to various people, friends, family. And this is published. You can look this up on Amazon. You can come and check it out or look at it later if you want to write down the exact title for me later. So what we're going to do is compare. I have a series of quotes, and you'll see how it works as we go. But the quotes begin where he'll describe his view as a younger man. We'll read that together. And then I'll click on the next slide, and then he'll describe how his view has changed now that he is older. And the change is always the direct result of his machine philosophy, viewing human beings as mere machines. So this first quote comes from a letter his son wrote. Okay, so I'll read it out loud. You can read it silently from the board. So this is his son writing this letter, Charles Darwin's son. He wrote, "The Duke of Argyll recorded a few words spoken by my father in the last year of his life." So now this quote is from the Duke of Argyll. The Duke of Argyll said, "I said to Mr. Darwin, with reference to some of his work on the fertilization of orchards, and various other observations he made of the wonderful contrivances of certain purposes in nature, I said to him it was impossible to look at these without seeing that they were the effect and the expression of a mind. I shall never forget Mr. Darwin's answer. He looked at me very hard and he said, well, that often comes over me with overwhelming force. Now, does this ring a bell from anybody, what we're getting at here? This is the design argument for God, right? We've talked a lot about this in Ratio Christi. So as a younger man, this design argument was very powerful and influential in his way of thinking. However, at other times, and he shook his head vaguely, adding, it seems to go away. So the force of the intelligent, or the force of the design argument for God was heavy upon him at times, but then it would drift away. So we may ask, why, Darwin? Why did this argument for God become less influential to you or less powerful on you? Why did it go away, Darwin? Well, here's a further explanation of it. He says the old argument, this is now Darwin himself writing a letter, he says the old argument from design in nature as given by Paley, William Paley, who's famous for the design argument back in the, I want to say late 1700s, which formerly seemed to me so conclusive, so he's talking about himself, he's writing this as an older man, but he's saying that as a younger man, the argument for God from design was very conclusive to him, to his mind. However, now fails. Now that the law of natural selection has been discovered. We can no longer argue that the beautiful hinge, for example, of a bivalve shell must have been made by an intelligent being, like the hinge of a door by a man. There seems to be no more design in the variability of organic beings and in the action of natural selection than in the course which the wind blows. Now just stop and think about what this is going to do to his view of humanity. If you think that we are created and designed by God, that causes us to think very highly of human beings, right? But if we are the result of natural processes that are random, just an accidental blowing of the wind, what does that do to your view of humanity? If I'm just an accident of the wind, why would I be more special than that chair or that random collection of rocks and leaves? You see where this is going? How about the first cause argument for God? So again, he's writing as an older man, describing his thinking as a younger man. He wrote, another source of conviction in the existence of God impresses me as having much more weight. He thought about these things. This follows from the extreme difficulty, or rather impossibility, of conceiving this immense and wonderful universe, including man. Think how highly he's viewing man at this point, with his capacity of looking far backwards and far into futurity as the result of blind chance or necessity. That's impossible to think that. So when thus reflecting, I feel compelled to look to a first cause having an intelligent mind in some degree analogous to that of a man, and I deserve to be called a theist. This conclusion was very strong in my mind about the time when I wrote The Origin of Species, his most famous work. So even when he wrote The Origin on Species, he was a theist, in large part, according to his own words, because of this argument. The argument of first cause, which we've talked a lot about the cosmological argument here in Ratio Christi. However, towards the end of his life, since that time, it has become gradually weaker, the force of this argument upon him. Why? Well, this is so convoluted. Think about this for a moment. Can the mind of a man, which has, as I fully believe, been developed from a mind as low as that possessed by the lowest animals, can such a mind be trusted when it draws such grand conclusions? The mystery of the beginning of all things is insoluble by us, and I, for one, must be content to remain an agnostic. So he says this argument for God was very powerful to him. It seemed very compelling. His mind seemed almost forced into concluding that God exists by the force of this argument. It seemed like the logical conclusion of these things. However, after his machine philosophy, after evolution, he concludes that his mind can't be trusted. The logical conclusion from this argument can't be trusted because how could you trust your mind to conclude logical things when it was just created accidentally from, lower life forms, worms, mice? I mean, if a mouse had a grand idea like this, could you trust it? And that's all our minds come from. So how could we trust our own minds? What's the problem with that, obviously? It's self-refuting. Why trust his theory of evolution then? If he's come to that using his mind. I mean, this is famously known as Darwin's doubt. Because if it is correct, and I think it makes logical sense if evolution is true, then not only can we not trust our reasoning here, we can't trust our reasoning, period, about anything, including evolution. Anyway, it's famously known as Darwin's doubt. You can Google that and read all sorts about it. So, evolution seemed to cause him to reject God, right? How is this going to affect his view of mankind? How is this machine philosophy going to affect his view of mankind? We're going to see, first of all, how it affects his view of himself. Take a look at this. He wrote, "The most usual argument for the existence of an intelligent God is drawn from the very deep inward convictions, which are experienced by most persons. Formerly, I was led by feelings such as those, to the firm conviction of the existence of God and the immortality of the soul." This is kind of like the moral argument for God. We look at humanity and we look at our children, we look at our romantic relationships with our husband and wife, boyfriend and girlfriend. We look at humanity and it's just so powerful how wonderful we are as humans. These experiences we have, they're just incredible. And it causes us to reflect on how majestic we are, and therefore we had to have come from some higher purpose. That's, the moral argument in a nutshell. In my journal, I wrote as a younger man, while standing in the midst of the grandeur of a Brazilian forest, I wrote, "It's not possible to give an adequate idea of the higher feelings of wonder, admiration, and devotion which fill and elevate the mind. I remember my conviction that there is more in man than just the mere breath of his body." And we experience this ourselves, right? When we see a sunrise or we fall in love, it's like, wow, this is such a powerful experience. It just causes us to well up and think what it means to be human, what a powerful feeling that is for us to experience these grandiose pictures of nature or experience love. And it causes us to think, man, we are more than just the breath that's in our body. There's something very special about the human experience. That was his thinking as a younger man. However, because of his machine philosophy, now the grandest scenes would not cause any such convictions to arise in my mind. I am like a man who has become colorblind. Isn't that sad? You see how his machine philosophy, viewing himself as just a random accident, just a machine developed by the laws of nature, is destroying his humanity. Schaeffer would say it this way. Schaeffer would say, when God is dead, man is dead. He used to think that man was something more, something special. But this machine philosophy has destroyed his view of humanity. Now we're going to see this strikingly next in his appreciation of beauty. Take a look at this. He writes as an older man, he says, "In one respect, my mind has changed over the last 20, 30 years. Up until the age of 30, younger man, or beyond even, poetry of many kinds, the works of Milton, Gray, Byron, Wordsworth, Coleridge, Shelley. They all gave me great pleasure, and I took intense delight in Shakespeare, the humanities, what reminds us what it means to be human. I've also said formerly pictures gave me considerable. Pictures here would be like paintings. Okay, if you go to an art museum and look at paintings. Rembrandt, the Italian Renaissance. They gave me considerable, in music, very much great delight. So appreciation of the humanities. Beauty, what I would say. However, as an older man, he wrote, "For now, though, for many years I cannot endure to read a line of poetry. I have tried lately to read Shakespeare, and I found it so dull that it nauseated me. I've also lost my taste for paintings, pictures, music." And he didn't understand why. This is what makes me so sad for him. He didn't understand why. He says, "This curious and lamentable loss of the higher aesthetic tastes is all the odder. My mind," look at this, this is key. He says, "My mind seems to have become a kind of machine for grinding out general laws, scientific laws, out of large collections of facts." Kind of what we look to computers for these days. But why? Why this should have caused the atrophy of that part of the brain alone, the appreciation of beauty, on which the higher tastes depend, I cannot conceive. And I'm not bashing him as being a stupid person. Clearly he was not stupid. He was a very intelligent man, an incredible scientist. I give him kudos for a lot of his discoveries. However, this is one thing that he didn't put together, how this machine philosophy was ruining his humanity. When God is dead, man is dead. And Schaeffer often pointed out that when man is dead, beauty and morality also are dead. One more about beauty here. He was writing a letter to somebody and he says, "I'm glad you were at the Messiah." This is Handel's Messiah. We still, attend these today. They're wonderful. Handel's Messiah. "I'm glad you were at the Handel's Messiah. It's one thing that I should like to hear again, to appreciate it as I did in the old days. However, as an older man, I should find my soul too dried up to appreciate it as I used to in the old days. And then I should feel very flat. For it's a horrid bore to feel as I constantly do, that I am a withered leaf for every subject except science. It sometimes makes me hate science, though God knows I ought to be thankful for it. An interest which makes me forget some hours every day my accursed stomach." He had very bad stomach pains later in life. And I would just say that it's not science that killed his humanity. I think as Christians we should celebrate science. Science is awesome. I think we should love science and congratulate him for a lot of his scientific discoveries. It's not that science killed his humanity, it's his machine philosophy, viewing human beings as just machines. So lastly, morality. This is gonna shock you. When I read this, or when I heard Schaeffer lecture on this, it just blew my mind. Look at this. He wrote, when he was on the Beagle, now that was the ship he was on when he, as a younger man, traveled around the world, recorded all of his observations about finches at the Galapagos Islands, if you remember that. So when he was on the Beagle, that ship traveling around the world, I was quite orthodox in terms of Christian belief and morality. I remember being laughed at by several of the officers on the boat, the ship, for quoting the Bible as an unanswerable authority on some point of morality. Just picture that for a moment. Charles Darwin being laughed at for being too biblical. This comes from a different section. All the previous quotes were just continuing on right after the first quote, but what I'm going to give you now actually comes from a different section. But he wrote, "The loss of these tastes he's talking in the context, again, poetry, plays, pictures, paintings, music, is a loss of happiness, and may possibly be injurious to the intellect and more probably to the moral character. That's why I brought it over, because he's talking about how he was younger, focused on the morality of the Bible, but now he understands that the same thing that's causing him to lose his tastes here is also hurting his moral and emotional nature. All right, the last quote from Darwin. Again, about morality. He says, "I may say that the impossibility of conceiving that this grand and wondrous universe with our conscious selves arose through chance, this seems to me the chief argument for the existence of God." Again, the idea that we just were cobbled together through random chance, evolution. It seems to me that that's just unbelievable to think that way, that we just arose, our amazing consciousness arose just through random chance. In fact, it used to, as a younger man, according to him, be the chief argument for God's existence. But now, as an older man, because of the machine philosophy he's developed, whether this is an argument of real value, I have really never been able to decide. The safest conclusion seems to me that the whole subject is beyond the scope of man's intellect. But, and this is what I want to hone in now, but man can do his duty. I think he's starting to see where this is going now. I think he's starting to see that this man is a machine philosophy has huge moral implications. I mean, if we really think of ourselves as just random accidents of the laws of nature, that we've just been cobbled together and are no greater than a random accident of a pile of leaves and sticks, if we're really no different than a pig or a bunny rabbit, in terms of they were developed accidentally, we were developed accidentally, there's nothing really that distinguishes us in our origin because we're all accidents. If that really is the case, I think he sees how this way of viewing things has the potential to incredibly reshape our views of morality. I think he sees where the logical conclusion of this. But he puts a colon there, semicolon, and the conjunction but. And I think this is his way of saying, no, we're not going to let it go to that conclusion, even though that's the logical conclusion of this machine philosophy. It's going to have ramifications for morality, but no, we're going to stop right there, put in a semicolon, and say, no, but man can do his duty. And in this context, he's talking about his moral duty. But that doesn't work. You can't have these presuppositions, you can't have this machine philosophy and not take it to its logical conclusion. He's trying to hold on to morality, but as Schaeffer would say, no, when God is dead, man is dead. And when man is dead, beauty and morality is dead. He might not have taken it to its logical conclusion, right? He might have tried to hold on to our moral duties in spite of these machinist philosophy presuppositions, but others who came along surely did. I just want to give you a few quotes here. This is from Jacques Monod, French, Nobel Prize winner, one of the founders of molecular biology, so came along after Darwin, of course, in the 1900s. He didn't stop with the semicolon. He took the machine philosophy to its logical conclusion. Look what he wrote. Anything can be reduced to simple, obvious mechanical interactions. The cell is a machine. The animal is a machine. Man is a machine. The universe isn't pregnant with life, nor the biosphere with man. Man at last knows that he is alone in the unfeeling immensity of the universe, out of which he emerged by chance. His destiny is nowhere spelled out, get this, nor is his duty. What duty are you talking about, Darwin? There's no duty spelled out in the universe. We're just here randomly, and these ideas of duty are just also random accidents or ideas we've dreamed up. I can give you many more quotes, but for the sake of time, I'm going to skip through them. Bertrand Russell, another Nobel Prize winner, said a very similar thing. We're just a bunch of accidental collocations of atoms. Richard Dawkins, probably the most famous evolutionist, famous atheist alive today, he said, we're survival machines. Robot vehicles blindly programmed to preserve the selfish molecules known as genes. This is a truth which still fills me with astonishment. Though I've known it for years, get this, I never seem to get fully used to it. I wonder why. But this is where the machine philosophy came from, and this is now what is, I would say, taken over the world. This man is a machine philosophy. Now, I would say this is scarier than the Terminator. I would say this is scarier than the Matrix. This man is machine philosophy is scarier because it does something worse than just destroy us physically, like the Terminator would. It does something worse because it destroys our humanity. Does that make sense? Do you see that? Now, I'm going to argue, and we're going to move back to the movies now. We only have about 15 minutes left till 9 o'clock. I'm going to argue now that this idea that I'm talking about, man as a machine philosophy taking over the world, this idea is so scary that Hollywood cannot deal with it. It's too scary for Hollywood to deal with. And I'm going to show you what I mean by that. Well, more and more movies are coming out over the last 10 or 15 years that portray machines not as cold, heartless, ruthless, killing machines, but as loving, kind, caring. You guys have seen probably these two movies, Transcendence, Her, where he falls in love with his operating system, which helps when it's voiced by Scarlett Johansson, I must say. But many movies like this are coming out where the machines are portrayed not as these cold, heartless, killing machines, but no, as loving, as even romantic. So what's going on here? Why is Hollywood doing this? Now, I don't know Hollywood people. I haven't plucked the depths of their motives. But here's my theory. This is what I think is going on at the cultural level. Okay? We've got the scientists, we've got modern philosophers, modern thinkers, modern scientists who are telling us we're machines, all we are machines, right? That's what's going on here. And so, but as a culture, as Western culture, we're wrestling with that idea. Well, we're struggling with this idea that we're just machines. We don't like that. Richard Dawkins says he knows it's true, but he can't get used to it. So our entire culture, we're struggling with this machine philosophy. So here's what I think is going on at the cultural level, which gets expressed in our art, right? That's how culture works, right? We're struggling with ideas, and we express our struggle through art, which is what movies are. 500 years ago, it was through paintings. Now we do it through movie, and still paintings, of course, but other art forms. Movies are just my favorite form of art, so it's the one that I focus on. So here's what I think is going on at a cultural level. So in movies, we've portrayed machines and robots as these cold, heartless, and unable, and things that are unable to really love. Right? We've seen that. Terminator, Matrix, Agent Smith, HAL 9000, the android in the original Alien movie. So we've portrayed machines as these cold, playing into our fears about machines. We've done this, and that's how we've portrayed machines and robots in movies. However, at the same time, we're being taught, mostly from scientists and philosophers who hold to these modern ideas, we're being taught this machine philosophy that ultimately we're just machines. And so if you just bring these two things together, if we are just machines, then, oh my goodness, what does that mean for us? That must mean ultimately we are cold, heartless, unable to really love. And in fact, this is exactly what the machine philosophy teaches, that love is just a chemical reaction. That you fall in love romantically and want to get married and have sex because that's what evolution programmed you to do. A species that wouldn't have those desires would quickly die out, right? So love is just a chemical reaction. The love you have for your children, again, chemical reaction, evolutionary programming, a species that didn't love and care for its offspring, that species wouldn't last. So, natural selection selected these desires. Love is a chemical reaction. But again, we resist that. Deep down in the very depths of our being, we resist that because we all deep down, I would say, believe that no, love is more than just a chemical reaction. Love is real. And so we've got this struggle going on. And this isn't just us in this room. This isn't even just the Christian culture. This is our entire Western civilization has this struggle, this friction going on between being taught we're just machines, but at the same time wanting to hold on to love, that love is real, that morality is real. Now we could remove this tension, right? We've got these two things going on. We could remove this tension in a couple different ways. We could just remove number two, right? We could just get rid of the machine philosophy. That would be a way to get rid of this tension. You see what I mean? However, it seems like in our culture, instead what we're doing is that we are changing number one. We don't like these conclusions, and so we're going back in our movies and changing number one and not portraying machines as these cold, heartless machines that are unable to love. In fact, when I was doing research for this a few years ago, I was amazed. I went back and I looked at those 4 movie franchises that we started this lecture with. You remember? Terminator, Alien, Matrix, 2001 Space Odyssey. And I started watching all the sequels in the franchises. So even within each movie franchise, even within their sequels, they can't stick with it. They all come back and change number one in the sequels to relieve, I would say, this tension. Take a look at this. In the first Matrix movie, the machines were cold, heartless, unloving. This is a quote from The Machine, Agent Smith, if you know The Matrix. This is the first movie, first Matrix. He said, when we started thinking for you, you humans, the machines thinking for the humans, when we started thinking for you, it became our civilization, which is, of course, what this is all about. Evolution. Morpheus. Evolution, like the dinosaur. You had your time. The future is our world, Morpheus. The future is our time. So the machines were cold, heartless, unable to love, destroying humans. However, in the sequels, The Matrix 2, 3, the machines are portrayed, at least some of them, as good, moral, loving. This is the machine saying, I love my daughter very much. I find her to be the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. Take a look at the 2001. If you guys remember, or you need to watch 2001, HAL 9000, famous classic line from Stanley Kubrick. The machine says, I'm sorry, Dave, I'm afraid I can't do that. He's trying to kill the human being here, and the human being, Dave, is pleading with the machine, HAL 9000, the computer, not to kill him, to let him live. And the computer, HAL 9000, says, I'm sorry, I can't do that. So again, the original portrayed machines cold, heartless, unable to love. However, in the sequel, they reflect upon it and say, actually, it wasn't his fault. That is, the computer. Hal was told to lie by people who find it easy to lie. Hal doesn't know how to lie, so he couldn't function. He became paranoid. Whether we are based on carbon or silicon makes no fundamental difference. We should each be treated with appropriate respect. In other words, they're preaching the message here. Machines are just like us. They can be loving, we can be loving. They can be evil, we can be evil. Look at the Alien franchise. In the first one, the android, Bishop, he said, he's talking of the alien now, the xenomorph, and he loves it. The android loves the alien that's going around killing everybody because he admires its purity. It's a survivor, unclouded by conscience, remorse, delusions of morality. And so in the first Alien movie, it's designed so that you hate the android because the android loves the alien that's going around killing all the humans. It's the humans that kill the android because the android begins siding with the evil killer alien. And so the first Alien movie, the android's portrayed in this unloving, heartless, cold way. But in the sequel, in Aliens, James Cameron's take, in the sequel, Aliens, the new android is the hero. He experiences love and morality. She is very scared of him. They bleed white, by the way. But she's very scared of him because of her experience with the android from the first movie. But he goes on to explain, I prefer the term artificial person myself. Those A2s from the first movie, they were always a bit twitchy. What happened with them could never happen now with our behavioral inhibitors. It's impossible for me to harm a human being. And he ends up becoming, as we'll talk about in a minute, the hero of the story. So again, the original machine's cold, heartless, unable to love, but in the sequel, they can't stick with it. The Terminator, the classic one. Remember the first Terminator movie from the early 80s? What do they say about the Terminator? It can't be reasoned with. It doesn't feel pity or remorse or fear. It has absolutely will not stop ever until you are dead. As you know, the sequel, the famous Terminator 2 from the early 90s, he's loving, kind, he learns human emotions, and this comes from the end of the movie. Get this. Because if a machine, a Terminator, can learn the value of human life, maybe we can too. This is how the movie ends. If a machine can be moral, maybe we can too. Well, how does this help us to reach people? If we're talking here as Christians, why is this helpful to understand our culture? Why is it helpful to understand where this machine philosophy has come from, how it's impacting the way people think? How is this helpful to us as Christians? I think it's important for us to understand what our culture is struggling with, to know the contradictions within our culture and why those contradictions are causing friction. You've got the machine philosophy out here in our culture, but yet there's this same idea, at the same time there's this idea that love really is real. We want to hold on to love even though we're being told that we're just machines. How can we reconcile those two things? There's a tension here. And the way that our culture is holding these two contradictions together, for the most part, is through a leap of faith. You might be familiar with this as, some people might call it postmodern philosophy, or else they'll call it maybe existentialism. But it's this romantic idea of a leap of faith. We've got these two contradictions. We're being taught we're just machines, but at the same time we want to believe that love really is real. It doesn't follow from our presuppositions that love is real. If we follow out logically our presuppositions, we conclude that love isn't real, but we just know deep down in our heart that love is real. And so the only way we can hold on to that is not through logic or reason or rationality. In fact, to hold on to love as a real thing, we have to get rid of logic and reason and rationality. We take this leap of faith towards morality, this leap of faith towards love, so we can hold on to it. So this contradiction in our culture is being held on to by this irrational leap of faith. This is most powerfully seen in the very last Matrix movie. The very last fight between Agent Smith and Neo in Matrix 3. I'm going to show you this quote now. We're almost done. This is so powerful because it hits right at this tension. So Agent Smith is talking, right? And this is the final battle between the machine, Agent Smith, and the human, Neo. Look at what Agent Smith says. He's about ready to kill Neo. This is like the final punch to kill humanity. He says, "Why are you fighting, you human? Do you believe you're fighting for something more than your survival? Can you tell me what it is? Do you even know? Are you fighting for freedom, truth, perhaps peace? Could it be for love? Illusions, Mr. Anderson. Temporary constructs of a feeble human intellect trying desperately to justify an existence that is without meaning or purpose. All of these things are as artificial as the Matrix itself. It's pointless to keep fighting. Why, Mr. Anderson? Why? Why do you persist?" So, I mean, the writers and directors, I think some of these artists are very intelligent and they can read the culture. And so they're putting this machine philosophy, this is machine philosophy, right? They're putting it in the mouth of the machine, and they're throwing this machine philosophy at the human and saying, this is the logical conclusion of the machine philosophy. How are you going to hold on to love in light of this? And does anybody remember, besides my children, does anybody remember Neo's answer?
Does he say, "I choose to"?
Because I choose to. In my opinion, the worst answer he could have given. It's not about what we choose to believe in. It's not about, I'm just going to believe in love because that's what I choose to believe in. You know, you don't base your beliefs and your choices of what to believe in based on what you hope for or wish for. Right? That's not what makes things true. If that was the case, you know, I would wish for all sorts of things that aren't true. And I know this is a movie, but my point is, this is all our culture has to answer the machine philosophy, is this irrational leap of faith that I'm just going to choose to believe in love. I know that's not the logical conclusion of my culture's presuppositions, scientific machine philosophy, but I'm just going to choose to believe. I think this is a huge failure. We were not meant to live in this sort of tension. We were not created to have our most important, basic beliefs of humanity rest on floating clouds. I don't think this is going to last. I don't think it's possible for this tension to last. That our key beliefs about humanity and why we shouldn't kill one another and why we shouldn't just take all that we can get, because if we're just machines and we're just here for 80 years to get as much as we can and get as much pleasure as possible, this romantic, well, I just choose to love, is not going to hold up, in my opinion. Let me wrap it up with this. It's so interesting to me when Hollywood... let me step back for just a moment. As Christians, we can explain that there is another way to avoid this tension. There is another way besides just a silly, irrational leap of faith. There's another way to avoid this tension. And that is, if Christianity really is true, then love is real. We don't have to believe in love with this irrational leap of faith. We don't have to give up our rationality to believe in love. If Christianity is true, we were created by a loving person. Love isn't an illusion. It's not an accident. It's a central part, practically the central part of ultimate reality. God, in the Trinity, loving. Love, God is love. So as Christians, we can step into this conversation and show people how it is possible to believe that love is real. But you don't have to do it with a leap of faith. If Christianity is true, then love is real because it's part of ultimate reality. We were created by a loving person. You know, it's interesting. This is what we'll close with. When Hollywood wanted to show that machines were truly loving, what do they have the machines do?
Show the sacrifice.
Sacrifice themselves. I mean, it's one thing for, Joaquin Phoenix to fall in love with Scarlett Johansson's operating system, right? But when the movie franchises really want to show that machines can be loving, they have the machines sacrifice themselves. It's what we see in all 4 of the movie franchise sequels that I've been talking about. In the Alien sequel, Bishop, the android, sacrifices himself to save the humans. In 2001 Space Odyssey, the sequel, the new machine, the new computer, sacrifices itself to save humanity. This is a quote from the computer right before it dies. Am I going to dream? In the Matrix trilogy, the Oracle machine sacrifices herself to the Agent Smiths to save humanity. And then, most famous of all, in Terminator 2, the Terminator sacrifices himself at the end of the movie to save John and his mother. So when Hollywood wanted to show that machines really could love, they had the machine perform the greatest act of love, sacrificing themselves to save others. As Christians, I think we can speak into this conversation that's going on in our culture and say love is the foundation of ultimate reality because God is love. And He created us and then expressed that love to us by sacrificing Himself to save us. And that's the message we have for the world as Christians, to speak into this cultural conversation that's going on. Thank you so much. Well, I know I went over tonight, so I apologize for that. And I know we want to wrap things up at 9 o'clock from now on. So we'll go ahead and dismiss if you guys want to stay and talk amongst yourself, ask questions, eat some more pizza and soda. Do you have any more announcements? Okay. All right.